This sun lights your firemen, the pilot lights out.
This football team is coming into our place. We're standing in our way.
This is a game of the heart. Focus and finish.
You know, while I was watching the Broncos-Colts game last night, three things came to mind that I thought were worth mentioning today. First, with or without Von Miller, the Broncos' pass defense is awful, and Champ Bailey is now the poster child for awfulness in Denver. He needs to retire, and before last year's playoff game against the Ravens. The second thing is something that just reinforces an argument that I've been having with other fantasy analysts all along, and viewers as well, and that's that Trent Richardson was awesome when he was running behind the Atlanta offensive line against inferior talent. But when you have a running style like his based upon running into people and trying to go through them in the NFL, it doesn't work. Defensive linemen, linebackers, his own fullback, his own offensive line, it doesn't matter. He just runs into people. Who taught this kid how to run? The Nigerian Nightmare? I mean, really? 3 yards per carry? Every week I argue with viewers who tell me that he's an RB1. He had 1 fantasy point last night. He has just 45 on the season. He's played 7 weeks on 2 different teams. That's less than 6.5 fantasy points per week. Please, don't tweet me anymore about Trent Richardson. He needs to rest in peace in fantasy heaven. And the third thing I thought about was kind of random. It just hit me that while Peyton Manning doesn't play for the team he will most be remembered for, he's still playing for the horses, just without shoes. All right, let's start with the tight ends. Now, I was pretty vocal about the fact that I didn't recommend playing Gronk until I saw him perform, and to me, the results were mixed. And frankly, while he caught 8 balls for 114 yards, good for 11 standard fantasy points, I thought he looked rusty, and he was clearly winded towards the end of the game. Now that said, he was targeted 17 times, which means that the Patriots truly feel he's healthy. And so long as you don't hear of any setbacks this week, he should be good to go, the rust will wear off, and his stamina will improve with each passing week. And kudos to the king, our own Scott Engel, who had this to say on This Week in Fantasy Football last week.
One guy NFL scouts and former scouts are talking up, you have to get him on your roster right now, is Jordan Reed of the Washington Redskins.
Now, Reed had a coming out party of sorts, hauling in 9 catches for 134 yards and a touchdown, and looked every bit the part of a tight end 1. RG3 is starting to look like the player we saw last season, throwing for 298 yards with 2 touchdowns and a pick, and he also ran the ball 11 times for 84 yards, which was extremely encouraging. And the same for Colin Kaepernick, who threw for 199 yards, also rushing 11 times for 68 yards and a touchdown. Now, this is really the first time the shackles were taking off those 2 quarterbacks this season. A lot of people asking me about Geno Smith today, and the fact that he played pretty well, including running the ball quite effectively. But I think you need to be a little cautious here, as he still hasn't cured his turnover problems. He threw a pick 6 to a receiver that was clearly covered. In fact, if you want to know what the Jets themselves think about him, well, they took the ball out of the rookie's hands in overtime, calling 11 consecutive running plays on their final drive. So while I think Smith should be on your roster, unless you have to use him, I don't know that I would play him until you see the Jets themselves display confidence in him in their play calling. Now, hopefully you were watching last week on Waiver Wire Wednesday when this happened. With Julio Jones out for the season and Roddy White hobbling around or even out, Falcons wide receiver Harry Douglas has emerged as a must-add fantasy option in all formats. Matt Ryan can't throw the ball to Tony Gonzalez every time, and Harry Douglas is going to be his second option. Douglas hauled in 7 balls for 149 yards and a touchdown, and without a healthy Roddy White, he's now the Falcons' go-to wide receiver. I'd also like to point out that for those of you playing in PPR leagues, Jacquizz Rodgers caught another 8 balls this week for 2 touchdowns. He was owned in only 43.4% of leagues coming into the game, so there's a potential roster opportunity sitting there just waiting for you. And if you're not in a PPR league, there's just no way you can play Ray Rice right now. You can't play his handcuff Bernard Pierce either, as the two are ranked first and second in the NFL in the percentage of runs that have generated 2 yards or fewer. They averaged just 2.76 yards on 21 carries yesterday, which would lead one to conclude that the offensive line may be to blame. But in fantasy, we don't care whose fault it is, we just want production. And it's just not there in Baltimore. With all the injuries to the Green Bay receiving corps, Eddie Lacy has become a real fantasy factor, rushing 22 times for 82 yards and a touchdown, and catching 5 passes for 26 yards to boot. With the injury to Sam Bradford, Zach Stacy will be counted on heavily. Bump up his value a bit, particularly in PPR leagues, as he's shown the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield pretty well. Today's Twitter question comes from @Beasley4, who wants to know if he should trade Miles Austin to an interested taker. All right, let's take a look. Austin was held without a catch yesterday on just 3 targets. That's not really the problem. The problem is that the Cowboys opened the game in a 3 wide receiver set, and Austin wasn't part of it, and he didn't lose his helmet. He played limited snaps as rookie Terrence Williams continued to emerge, and Cole Beasley is even garnering targets in the slot position, and he's probably someone that you should look at. So if you have a taker for Austin, and it's someone that you would play right now in Week 8, I'd go ahead and trade for him. Now, if you have a question you want answered, hit me up with a tweet, and if I don't use your question on the program, I'll tweet you back with my best advice. But please, no more questions on Trent Richardson. He shall never be spoken again here. No more. And be sure to tune in to the Roto Experts Fantasy Football News Notes and Analysis segment here every weekday. I'll be here to keep you current and ahead of the competition, and on weekends, come back for This Week in Fantasy Football, as I team up with the King, Scott Engel, covering the week that was, and the week that will be, answering your viewer questions. It's the Vikings at the Giants tonight, with 2 teams reeling and looking to get back on track. Should be an entertaining game with plenty of fantasy overtones. Enjoy the game, everyone. For Roto Experts, I'm Mike Cardano.